Welcome, everyone, to VNture Podcast. Together with my host, MR, we would like to invite you all to listen to us talk about our passion, a storytelling medium called visual novels. We hope you learn more about the medium and learn to enjoy it as much, and I hope you also get to hear stories from all of those who would venture with us together. Thank you, listeners. So, without further ado, MR, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. MR speaking. How can I best describe myself? I think I would use the term I'm just a guy who wanted to find his way. Around 6 years ago, I was looking into communities online of like-minded individuals in the realm of anime, visual novels, and all around that topic. What I did find on Discord is communities dominated by lowest common denominator, by memes. And while that's not a bad thing, I looked for something deeper, something more meaningful. And that way, I said, okay, I can't find what I want, so let's try creating what I want. And that set me on a road of finding like-minded people to start some initiatives with. Fast forward a couple of years, and on one fateful day, me stalking the visual novel subreddit, I stumbled upon a letter of resignation of one of the mods. And that begins my journey with Taurus. As I spoke to him, I talked about my initiatives and what I'm creating, and I invited him to my radio, Maid Radio, after which episode we had such a great time, we thought, what if we push it further? And that becomes the foundation of the podcast you, dear listeners, are listening today, an VNture Podcast. So just as a reminder, Taurus, if you could reintroduce yourself.
Yes, totally. I know this is our second episode and all, but still it doesn't hurt to remind everyone. In my case, I've been a long-time visual novel fan, only recently got into other, weeb communities like anime and whatnot. But visual novels have always been my passion just because there's such a unique blend of so many different storytelling factors, like visuals and audio and the writing. I was formerly a moderator for the subreddit r/visual novels, and I was able to raise it from a relatively small place of 20,000 members all the way to 500,000, and helped create a whole bunch of neat experiences for everyone involved there. I'm no longer part of the place. MR reached out to me, and together we came upon the idea of holding a visual novel podcast. And hopefully this is another way to give back to community and fans and provide some sort of content for them. So I hope you all enjoy. So speaking of the podcast, that ties us into, we're going to be covering MR's iceberg of visual novel tastes. If you'd like to take it away, MR?
Yep. This is another iceberg. And just to reiterate, for those who forgot or did not listen to the first episode, I highly recommend it. But let me just introduce. Those icebergs that we prepared represent our tastes, and the placement in it represent how easy for us is to explain that and in some sort of way to recommend. The higher it is, the easier it is. The lower it is, the more insider knowledge and a customization to visual novels as a whole you need. So, without further ado, let's go from the top. The easiest, oftentimes mentioned to be the best started visual novels, happens to be the one I have on the top. It's Katava Shoujo. This one sticks with me. It's the rare gem, I would say, on my list, because it's a slice of life, a genre I have trouble reading at all, but it has such a powerful message as it deals with disabilities and how disabled people like to be viewed by others. That kind of message in which those less fortunate people who either by being born with them or due to some accidents happening are disabled, they do not want your pity. They want to be seen as equals. They don't want to be treated as some sort of poorer for it. They just want to experience life to the fullest, just like other people fully able do. And that kind of message, especially since I read that novel when I was younger, it stuck with me for a long time. It's one of the first ones to make me tear up inside of how powerful it is to, even though not disabled myself, I can relate to the feeling of striving for equal viewing. So having to speak with other people and viewing each other as equals. This is something that just transcends injuries or situations. It's a read I would definitely recommend, especially those who want to try out the medium for themselves. The second from the top, the classic, one of the best example of adaptation from the form of visual novel to the anime, and it just so happened I also first experienced Steins Gate as an anime. It started the trend, for me at least, to pursue how the experience and how the content I consume, this being the Steins Gate anime, how it looks in the original, what's missing from the adaptation, what's more to experience. And that was the first anime ever I've reached out to the original source to experience all over again. And it's super hard for me, being the anime fan that transitioned to the visual novel fan, to recommend one over the other. It's that good of a adaptation that it did not lost anything in translation from one medium to another. Both starting point have its benefits and barely any costs. This is one I would highly designate you to try, regardless of the form you choose. Next up on the list, and funnily enough, in a different position than Taurus, is Fate. Fate being the most popular, probably from all of those I have. If I remember correctly, is the most popular on the VNDB list. Is the tale about heroic spirits battling it out in a battle royale, and heroic spirits being heroes throughout mythologies, throughout all the cultures clashing, apparent in history of humanity, being reincarnated using strange magic of that world to fulfill a wish and to manifest a grail that grants wishes. It's a very intriguing read. It's one of those detective stories in which, if you really get hooked on all the mythos, on all the cultural influences, on all the atmosphere of deduction, I really highly recommend. Also, it has a very special place for me as one of the very, very few visual novels I read alongside one of my friends, and we made it a point of an almost daily, but mostly weekly, updates of how we viewed certain chapters, how we felt about the current topic we read, how far did we progress. Obviously, being at the same time very careful about not spoiling the moments for whoever was behind. I look fondly about those memories because currently, it's so much harder and so much rarer to create a situation in which two people in parallel at the same time read and share the experience. I mean, one of those problems comes from how much more is there to pick from, as the translations efforts picked up in the recent year quite a lot for the visual novels in general.
Mm-hmm. That's a good thing, but imagine having way too much choice to where it's getting harder and harder to discuss titles with other people because they just keep spreading their tastes out into different fields.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's super cool that you found a friend who you got to read Fate Stay Night with. So did you two also theorize like people's identities or what was going to happen upcoming in the story too?
Exactly. Yeah, we had to. We had to. This is such a cool deductive mystery in which one of the core components is not a defeat by power. It's not a power scaling like you see in typical manga or anime such as Dragon Ball. There is no linear scale, even though Fate itself uses that terminology of endurance A, luck C, etc. It's still the more important part is how you can outwit the opponent and how much more important the war of information is rather than raw power.
Mm-hmm. I was surprised seeing that in Fate Stay Night, how like on the pause menu you could see like encyclopedia entries for all the information you have in your opponent so far, and like you said, there'll be RPG style stats for each people's characteristics, like you mentioned, strength or luck or agility. But in story, those almost never seemed to come up at all. It was always like, like you mentioned, information wars instead of outwitting your opponents.
The closest we got to the stats being referenced is comparisons. So for example, once we establish this specific hero is either the strongest or stronger than the one protagonist has in his possession, it will always be compared in that way. Beware, this is the strongest, so you better prepare. Or, oh man, that one hero is stronger, so you better be on your toes.
Never. Don't go blow to blow with them.
Exactly. Never did they reference, for example, yeah, the strength is A and I have EX or B or D. Never concrete stats, but always relative. But the more important part is how you will leverage the information you gathered on your enemy in order to overcome that situation or that disbalance of power. Like you asked, yeah, that kind of intrigue, that kind of guessing game, that kind of coming up with either strategies or using the identity and the legend of that hero against them was the most intriguing part of figuring out exactly who's who. Yeah, and we had quite a list of possible twists and turns. Now that I think about it, speaking so much about Fate, it's one of those VNs almost daily, or at least almost every time I sit down to read it, I open the menu and go over through all of the character sheets. I mean, sheets as in those, because those are very similar to how a D&D style character will be written. Every single time. Go open the page, look up every hero, check if anything changed, anything appeared new. Yeah, maybe some update, maybe some crucial detail that just by existing shifts any theories, either by proving them or disproving them completely. So yeah, I know, now that I think about it, that's one of those VNs that really took advantage of an encyclopedia of knowledge. It's not sole and not the only example of that, but I think this is the most known and the one that was the earliest in my VN reading career. I have to say also, it was very interesting the approach they had for the sequel. But since I'm just introducing on the iceberg titles, for those who are interested in Fate, I really recommend the sequel, The Hollow Ataraxia.
Same here, loved it.
Yeah. It's a bit different style, but you'll get used to it and you'll see the good parts of the detective story in there. Okay, next on the list is Valhalla. This is the more recent position on the list, but it showcases one thing that is kinda customary on my list, or at least just like Taurus has a soft spot for English language or English original language visual novels. I have a soft spot for those who use gameplay to convey a message, and Valhalla was one of those. Very well made. It puts you in a place of barista is for coffee, and I completely forgot. Bartender, thank you very much. Bartender who brews drinks. And one of the endearing part is when you figure out, like this is interesting part. You are a bartender, you kinda get to know people, the common customers that keep returning. But the most intriguing part, and why that one stick to me and landed straight on the iceberg for it, is when they use that gameplay. You understanding slowly, getting used to that customers. They come in, they order, oftentimes the same part, and you keep remembering. But then what hit me is when those same people come in a bad mood. You had a couple interactions with them, so you understand how they were. And they order something. And you give them something else. And they are happier for it. And that blew me away completely. While probably not realistic, as a bartender who doesn't keep the order that's given, it's very unprofessional. But for that storytelling perspective, you having such a deep understanding of customer and knowing how you could improve their mood by serving correct drink at the correct time, and that drink not necessarily being the one they ordered, just perfect. This is exactly how you use gameplay to convey a message. I recommend it highly. Coming right ahead, speaking about the gameplay, and moreover, immersion. I cannot speak immersion without mentioning Analog High Story. To this day, I have not found a more immersive visual novel, if you consider that a visual novel, I do, as it shatters all the barriers between you and the game. You take a role of a space detective on a shuttlecraft investigating what happened with it was a cruiser or a bigger ship that crashed and has an accident, so it's a wreckage right now. In order to understand what happened, you go through the logs and the black boxes of that derelict. But what happened there is you meet an AI. And this is where the game takes it to the next level, the idea of immersion. You, as a character in-game, and also you, as a reader, sit behind the computer, and you, as both detective and a person in real life, talk to the rendered character on the screen using the interface that is allowed to you. And you, as a real life person, you do exactly the same things the detective does. There is absolutely nothing between you and the game at that point. And to this day, I have not found another title that goes so hard on the immersion to this point. Even the small segments in which you mess around with drives and using your elite hacker skills, you still have to manually type that in exactly like the detective does. This level of immersion stick with me to this day, especially some of the ending screens, RCGs, showcase the protagonist touching the screen as the only way to bridging the distance between the rendered characters and themselves. And if you think about it, that's the closest we, as reader, are to touching those characters in the stories. Damn, it's a powerful one. Story itself, it's hard to describe. It's especially given that it's a detective story of piecing together what happened. I don't want to spoil it. I would definitely recommend at least the first game, because oddly enough, and this is also an oddity in VNs, this game has a sequel that imports your save files from the first game to continue with your choice. For those two reasons alone, a sequel that continues your save file and the immersion of the game itself, I highly recommend just to experience it, as it's not really that long. Coming back to the iceberg, how can I best describe Necopara? Just like
for a lot of people, I'm not sure if you need to describe it.
I mean,
it's almost a household name at this point.
True. They grew very fast. Since the first release, I think one of the best choices they made is simultaneous release. So every single time they released in the Japanese language and translated in English. So we did not wait for translation. And this is one of the very first VNs I remember that did that consistently for every single release of every titles in their series. Not only that, but also it's one of the very first VNs I read because it was recommended to me. So this one represents my transition from being a normie, let's say, into that person who got heavily invested in visual novels. As this was one of those that dragged me into the visual novel sphere. From the same person, from the same friend with whom I read The Fate together. He recommended me Necopara, and from that I got dragged into visual novels, and I can't live without them anymore. So with that, this takes a special place in my heart just because of that. And while it can be described as slice of life, this also represents my approach to slice of life. I maybe even like, but I was going to say tolerate, but maybe like is a better word. I like when slice of life introduces a fantastic element that is not representative of real life. So in this case, obviously, is the idea of having cat girls. There's another slice of life that could have, for example, Grim Reapers or some supernatural element like that. And those kinds of slice of life I really like because it blends the mundane and normal with the exciting and unknown. And that's exactly the blend that works for me. So yeah. Soon there will be another Necopara as they announce another one. So let's see how that series goes. Whether it will be concluded with the next release or even go further beyond with that. We'll see.
Speaking of which, another upcoming Necopara release is the mobile gacha game. And I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on gacha game adaptations with visual novels?
I need to think a bit, but I mean, my first instinct, let's go that out of the way. When you create gacha, there's a different criteria for me and a different respect if your gacha anchors itself over existing IP against gacha that tries to establish itself as an IP from the ground up. Because there's a real potential harm and exploitation in a gacha style game that takes more predatory business model and attaches itself to something already established. This is a road to the lowest common denominator. So you leverage nostalgia and people who are not used to that business model and potentially are more exploitable, because let's be honest, if we have a diehard Nekopara fan, hello, it's me, I will have less inclination to pass that title. Meaning, because I am already invested in the series, I want to experience all it has to offer. So already I am a very highly potential customer. Because of that, it's so much easier for me to get hooked and exploited. Meaning, if you put enough gated content that requires payment, I am more likely to pay for it. So inherently, I have less respect to those gacha style games that attach themselves to the established IP. I have way more respect to the gacha games that build IP from the ground up, for example, Genshin Impact. Because first and foremost, they have to prove to you that they are worth your time. Before everything else, they have to prove, be it quality, being business practices, they have to prove. While Nekopara can leverage nostalgia against you. So again, I tend to avoid gacha style games. Will that change with Nekopara? Because that's the title of Nekopara set in gacha. We'll see. I have not decided whether or not I'll even try it or not. I'm one of those who prefer to pay full price and have the entire experience rather than free to play, but being gated away through microtransaction and separate payments over time. So that's my approach. It has no bearing on whether or not it will actually be good. That's rather my approach.
There's always that too. No matter what philosophical stances you take about the matter, if the game's a pile of garbage, then it doesn't even matter if you're okay with it. I'm not going to check it out.
Yeah, exactly. And if the opposite is true, and for some reason this is the second coming of some messiah, I'll check it out. Even if inherently it can have a business model I disagree with. If it's good enough, I'll try it out. So, like I said, I have nothing against it. If I had my way, I would definitely prefer to be a proper visual novel. I just pay once and experience fully, rather than having a constant and evolving style. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some of the titles on my iceberg, such as BlazBlue, blurry the line between whether or not you would consider this as a visual novel or fighting game. And probably those titles mark also my transition from the normie who focus on the games, even if in anime style, but still gameplay first, into the story-focused reading and visual novel presentation. I actually fondly remember BlazBlue being interesting point in my VN reading career, as I approached this game with scorn and hate, and left loving it. So this is a very peculiar example. Why? Why though? Why did I have such a bad idea about the game? Because it comes from a developer, Arc System Works, who previously worked on a game I loved, that being Guilty Gear. If I remember, due to legal reasons, their license expired and they created brand new IP. And I felt at the time, me being ignorant and young child that I was, that they scrapped the IP, that being Guilty Gear, and built something completely different. So killed something I loved and gave something new. So that's why I approached the game with hate and animosity. But somehow it won me over and I loved it since. Coming a little bit lower on the spectrum, you have Evenical. Oh man, what can I say about Evenical? God damn. I don't even know where to begin. It's probably one of those erotically heavy, gameplay focused game I would definitely recommend, regardless of a person's stance of the distribution between age content and normal story, because it breaches a lot of heavy stuff in terms of politic and geopolitical tensions. It creates a world truly unique, and without giving away any spoilers, and twists your very idea of how society would work if you change some fundamental truths about how humanity operates as a whole. In this game, the most important part are two divine laws that override everything else. Meaning, you have only one person to marry, and the person you are intimate with by default is the one you marry, and you cannot kill. That's it. Those are the rules, but they are not enforced by the law of man. It's not something written in a law and something by passed by government and enforced. No. This is so much higher than that. It's enforced by the rules of the world itself. To be human is not to kill. Be human is to be not to cheat and have a single partner. The moment you break one of those sacred commandments, you'll stop being human altogether. And that warps the entire perspective of both worlds and how rules are developed in such a country. Why do you even need a police if as long as you're human, you're good, you're not a sinner? How would look? How do you trust your neighbor? As long as they're human, they're trustworthy because they did not break the sacred law. It's such a fun...
And some laws end up being universal across all sorts of societies.
Yes.
Simply because if you break them, society just legitimately can't function.
Yeah.
That's why, it's almost a standard, like you said, a rule of nature that you have to ban people from killing.
Yeah, but it's so weird, given that obviously we operate in normal reality and we adhere to the morality that was taught to us when we were children, or the morality that is passed down through, for example, Geneva Convention. And in this game, it's not codified, it's not established or agreed upon. No, it's completely enforced to the way you cannot escape it ever. And that sounds utopic, but it's so dysfunctional in practice. I cannot describe it in 2 words how many problems this creates. Because in all of my description, one thing I did not specify. And this recontextualizes everything I said, because your will does not matter. Your actions do. And that warps the entire rule set so hard. On another topic, kind of related to fate, when it comes to I wouldn't say one in a lifetime, but rather very memorable experiences for me. Evenical marks the first and so far only game I multitask, meaning I read and it just so happened I talked at the same time on Skype at the time. Yeah, I know it was Skype, it was quite a long time ago. And in that conversation, sadly I do not have records of it because Skype being Skype. In that conversation, the person whom I talked with experienced how my mood changed and how this game, despite looking and sounding by the description I provided, meaning the game that creates a world that strives towards no killing and no cheating, despite all of that, and creating an interesting atmosphere of wanderlust, of adventure, of traveling. On one part, on the chapter I created, it was upbeat, it was happy, it was so much joy in just wandering around the place. And it takes one moment to break everything down to fire and brimstone. And I remember vividly to this day when a person I talked to during the span of my conversation asked, "Is everything okay?" Because that game just affected me so much. It was visible in my speech when I was reading and texting at the same time. And it was such a crash course of public disinformation, war profiteering, and scare tactics on a huge scale that was brought up in that particular chapter. It was hard for me to describe.
Oh dear, heavy themes, huh?
Yeah. It was very heavy.
Oh man.
Yeah, but due to that, it affected me greatly, and I remember to this day some of those lessons I took to heart and remember to always be a good person regardless of circumstances. And that's a big lesson that Evenical preaches. That despite all of that, find your circle of friends. Find people who care about you, so you care about them equally, and make the best of the worst situation you're in. And that's such a wonderful message to say, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On that note, I think we're going to have to wrap things up for today for this iceberg. I know there's plenty left, but that will have to be for another time.
Exactly. So
thanks.
I hope with my explanations of the iceberg, I could influence or at least touch our viewers and maybe motivate them a little bit to try it out if they didn't. The medium as a whole, or maybe some of the titles I brought in today. So thanks again for everybody listening in. Thanks Tauros for co-hosting it. And see you all in the next venture that we do.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time.